Hi, y'all. I don't know why the music wasn't playing. We're live. Surprise, we're live. Welcome to another Monday night. Everyone's rested up, right, after the break, if you had a break. Welcome, Richard. Welcome, Bill. Is there anything either of you want to share before we get started into our amazing topic? Are you worried?
No more than every other week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
No. Other than this, interesting side note. As many of you know, I have kids who are of various racial backgrounds, and my son just got his license. So it was the first time that we've really had to have like the talk, and those of us that are people of color know which talk I'm talking about. But yeah, that's been an interesting thing because nobody gave me the talk, nobody had to, but yeah, just negotiating that and what to do if you're pulled over and how to behave and how not to get hurt. I hate to even say that, but it is what it is. That's actually a good reality as a white dude to face.
It's a good preface to the question that I wanted to pose to you, because in this chapter, Oluo talks about getting pulled over, and the conversation that happens when after getting pulled over and getting a ticket, people, you want to say, oh my God, I was so scared, I was upset, my heart rate went up, there were 3 of us in the car, and we don't, maybe I wasn't speeding, I don't know, because I couldn't ask. I couldn't even ask. And so this question that came up when her brother gets pulled over and asks, because that's the problem, is that we're not allowed to ask, or that's the fear that if we ask, that we might be met with, are we going to have a problem here? And I don't know, I wanted to bring this up to you too, because I don't know if you understand, or if you can, you can surmise, maybe you can guess when this question is posed, what that means to the person in the car when an officer says, a white officer says to a person of color, are we going to have a problem?
It's a threat.
When you get pulled over, Richard or Bill, does this question come up?
No,
I don't know. I've never been pulled over before. Just kidding.
Oh my God! I'm kicking you out of the room immediately. Goodbye. We're not going to talk to you anymore.
Good thing my wife didn't hear that in the background. You would have heard her laughing, or crying. I'm not sure which. I honestly, I feel that is a very thinly veiled threat, the way I read it.
Thinly veiled. Okay.
Are we going to have a problem here? Like, are you going to make me escalate this? Is basically what that's saying.
Yeah. Scary. But I wanted to start with this question. Richard, I don't know if you want to jump in, because I want to bring Tommy and London in if
well, just from my experience, I've never been asked anything by a police officer that even resembles that question. And I've been pulled over quite a few times, even as a teenager. I got pulled over all the time as a teenager, but never did I ever feel threatened. And I've spilled beer on police officers. I've had a beer can off the roof and spray the police officer all over his hat, and laughed, like just thought it was the funniest thing I've ever seen, but never felt like he was going to, stick me with a baton and start beating the crap out of me. Never had any even second thoughts about that. And so when I read this subject, it's hard to not be on my experience and not to mentally, even though I know better, I'm starting to understand, but it's not just outright defend police officers. There's still a desire to think that police officers are wholesome and good and not a threat. And so what do you do? What do you do when you know that a good segment of our population, that's not true? So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be a lot to cover, but usually we just kind of do a preface on the question, but I kind of wanted Tommy and Lyndon to have a chance to, if you've read, please tell us. And if you haven't, maybe you've heard this before, maybe you've said this before, because you both have experience in law enforcement. I'll bring Tommy in first, and you can tell me if this introduction suits you, sir.
Tommy said that to me last week, but it wasn't in the context of him being a police officer. Does that count?
Let's take out the BC Police Academy. Let's take out the faculty director. Just leave faculty in there.
Will do. Right. You've got more freedom now. Is that what you're saying? Okay. And welcome to London.
You can do it that quick?
Yeah. Hi, London. Thank you for joining us. Everybody, this is London. If you could just explain a little bit about what your job is at UCLA and why you are here tonight. Oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted? Yes. I fixed it.
I'm here. I'm here because you invited me. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. But I've been at UCLA for about 15 years and getting to do a lot of cool assignments here. My last assignment before going back to patrol was a threat management detective. So I'm back. I left that unit in July, and so now I'm back on patrol as a field training officer.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm gonna put this question back up, and if either of you want to,
hey, London, how you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Or you guys
long
can
time no talk to.
I know, right?
Yeah, a couple months.
Yeah.
You never know.
You never ever know. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Good.
You have to let us in.
I'm sorry, Letty. I know him.
You're sorry you know him?
No.
Well, that's good. That's good. This is going to be a good conversation then. Okay, maybe this is too much of a I don't know. Let's just put this up. I'm going to take that question down, and we can just talk about the actual topic of the chapter. And I did pull up a few quotes that I sent out previously about kind of what the focus, to help us focus on the conversation. And we can stick with the getting pulled over first because she spent several pages discussing it and talking about how she and her brothers felt, and then because she is who she is, and putting it out on Twitter and kind of like giving a heads up, the idea that you have to put out like a all call and say, hey, I'm in this situation, so that people can follow up. And sometimes it's positive and sometimes it isn't. Because you do get questions like this, right? What's the proof? What's the proof that you're getting pulled over based on your race? I think I want to get the perspective of law enforcement. So if Tommy or London, if either one of you want to talk about training, you want to talk about pulling people over, you want to talk about the community, what based on this quote from the book.
Just from being out back in training again, the whole you have no proof if it was anything other than a traffic stop. I know that's kind of easier said in a sense. Like you don't know what's in the heart of the person that pulled the individual over at that moment in time. They could easily say, well, it was nothing. It was an out tail light. It was a expired registration. But when you really kind of look at the heart of it, it's why. Like, why did you really do what you did? And I've spoken to some officers, and like I said, being in training, I've spoken to some officers that tell me why they do a certain, why they look for a certain car, or why they look for certain individuals that might look, a certain way. And they tend to always be, and just to be real, they tend to always be from the Black and brown community. And you wonder, okay, what is it that is telling you? What is it that is in your heart to make you feel that everyone in that community is doing something, that's not good? So, it is true. That's a scary statement, that you have no proof, because you really don't, because you don't know what's in the heart of a person unless you're that person. And, what I know I try to, teach my trainees is that you have to erase a lot of the stereotypes of what people have taught you, whether it was in the academy, whether it was training officers that you had before. You need to erase it, and you need to start viewing crime as crime, and crime could be associated with any race of people. But you can't specify it to one set group.
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned the community, I'm going to switch to this quote we can keep talking about. I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but you don't know, but we do know numbers, right? We see that these things are factually relevant to when people say this has been their experience. There are numbers to back them up. Tommy?
First of all, let me say that London comes from the greatest university in the United States and in the world, at UCLA. It really is not a better academic institution in the United States or the world, but I just want to throw that out there, okay?
Okay.
I didn't wear my UCLA shirt tonight, London, because I knew you were going to be on. I will tell you, Leti, that history has taught me that I never think about it when I pull somebody over, but my officers definitely think about it when they pull somebody over, because the data shows that the stats are going to be in the Black and brown community, and officers want to have a good showing. So when I worked in LA County for a while, almost everybody that was pulled over was either Black or brown, yet there were plenty of whites. For instance, in the area of Downey, there were plenty to pull over, but that's not who was getting pulled over. When I was out in Riverside, the same thing. And, the officers are quick to say, especially since you're the watch commander, they're quick to say, hey, I didn't pull them over because of this. But you know how it is. You were out there. That's the common line. And so we're supposed to ignore why they did what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my experience is limited when it comes to that specifically, but I know what it sounds like when there are gendered responses or, sexually harassing kind of responses. That feeling that you get, and you don't know. I mean, I don't know what your experiences have been in terms of speaking up, calling attention to it. When that happens, it's like a passing comment. How do you deal with that? How do you confront that especially if you're training or you're the boss?
I think you have to speak up about it, but you have to be, you can't be afraid to kind of be on that island by yourself, because in speaking up against it, you tend to be, ostracized. People might say, oh, you don't really know what real policing is, and all those different types of excuses that they give. But you have to be willing to call people out. I know, like I said, when I came back to training, I was calling my trainees out left and right at the stuff that they were doing. I was like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. That explanation of why you did what you did doesn't make sense. It's that you're looking at a set group of people in a certain light, and this is what you believe. And whether it's the media, whether it's your peers, whoever it might be that shaped your opinion about a said group of people, you need to kill it right now, because it's not gonna fly. Not when you're in the car with me. But you have to be willing to, and then even go a step further and continue to hold those officers accountable. But I think that's where the problem is. Like, not a lot of folks are willing to step up and hold people accountable. And then, so all you do is you continue the same old song, the same old story continues on and on, because the voices of truth end up being silenced by the majority. So, if you can get more people to feel empowered to step up, to not feel that, you're going against this thin blue line, but that you're actually doing good for the community that you said that you were going to serve and that you were going to protect, that if you can make them see that, I think you have a chance of actually internally changing the culture.
Richard, were you gonna say something?
he's so right. Let me say again.
Sorry, go ahead. I thought Richard was going to say something, but
He is so right. And I tell you that thin blue line he's talking about has its own code of silence. And if you want to be accepted in the law enforcement world, you will not hold somebody accountable. I mean, I've been at calls, and I know he's been at calls, where you've had fellow officers, I had sergeants, say the N-word and then turn to me and says, but you know what? You're one of us. It doesn't apply to you. You're not in that. And it happens. And if you say anything, I always did because it was wrong. The problem you have, who am I going to complain to? Because
right.
When I was on patrol 15, 20 years ago, I would complain to my sergeant, who was white, who would complain to the lieutenant, who was white, to the captain, et cetera, et cetera. And you had to be mindful that if you did that, you would be out on that island by yourself. Yep. Only in the last 10 years have we been able to hold people accountable. And I love what I hear London say, because it's a new phenomenon. I've been in policing 30 years. No way would you try and report somebody, because who are you going to report it to?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's big changes happening, Tommy?
Say again?
I said, do you think there's big changes happening? I'm watching the Chauvin trial, and I see the officers that are testifying against another officer, including the chief of police, and I just, is that politics, or is that true change happening?
It's politics. They have him dead to rights. If it was a questionable incident, like in Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, Stephen Clark, Michael Brown, Philando Castile, if it's a questionable event, they're not going to do that. But here, they're going to get on the side of, if the evidence is overwhelming, why wouldn't they do that? Because they're going to come out smelling good. I'm disappointed because they should have done this for every single incident, not the one that's a dead bang.
Yeah.
Right. I want to pull this quote up. It's on page 89, and this goes with what we're talking about now. And if we're drawing attention back to the Chauvin trial, then this is sort of that idea that it has to be proven, like absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind. Everyone saw it across the world. There's video, there's testimony, there's witnesses to prove that this one person did this thing. And now we can hold that one person accountable. Like, that's what this says to me. I mean, does this ring true for anyone else, this idea of a bad apple?
Well, I'm going to say on the bad apple side, when I read this, this quote. If I just mentally change the name to doctor instead of officer, and I read that, I'm like, wait a minute, we would never tolerate one bad apple. We would do all we can to filter, and doctors police themselves in this instant. I mean, they really do get rid of bad apples because they don't want them around, because they have to deal with the fallout. And it's the same with police officers. You know, you hope that they would want to get rid of these bad apples as quickly as possible, and then deal with the issue. But I don't know. That's sort of
Is anyone else tired of using bad? Who started saying bad apple? Because it seems to me that it's more like a faulty grenade or something. Because a bad apple might be gross, but it doesn't kill anybody.
I think bad apple is a bad thing to say. I think it's harmful to equity, because I think what it says is, hey, this person's an anomaly, right? They're a person who is on their own decided to be a bad person, or has become a bad person in a whole sea of really good things happening. And what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that police officers are all bad or anything like that, but I am saying that I think there's enough evidence based on what we see in the news and what we hear Tommy and London saying, and what we know about police culture, that it's not just some random person in the police force who's decided to be or has become a bad person in a total vacuum. It's a whole culture that has evolved. And if you read what Oluo says about it, it's a culture that is sort of started in a bad place, right? With the Night Watch and the history there, but it has evolved into a culture of protection of each other and protection of people over protection of principles, or the enforcement of principles. And I think there are a lot of people who even acknowledge that culture, and at the same time would say that systemic racism doesn't exist. Well, I think that culture is exactly one of the systems that we're talking about. Systemic racism doesn't just mean laws and formal structures. It also exists in our cultures and in the things that we allow to develop. And I think one of the antidotes to that is making sure that we have representation throughout all levels of policing and law enforcement leadership, because then if I do hear somebody say something inappropriate, or I am aware of somebody who did something that was inappropriately racially motivated, I have somebody to go to who's going to respect what I have to say and understand what I have to say. And I think that's important. And I'm not suggesting that that's a simple answer, because as we all know, providing representation in any sort of industry, I mean, Lord knows in education, we've had the same issue, right? That's tough. It's complicated, and it takes a long time and a lot of pushing and a lot of really great people sort of hitting that glass ceiling before it finally breaks. But that's sort of where I'm coming from on. I think it's a cultural thing. So the bad apple thing, to answer your question, that undercuts the idea that there's a cultural change that needs to happen in law enforcement. And I won't pretend to know anything about law enforcement, but I do believe that there's a culture there that perpetuates some of these wrong ideas, and it's not just bad apples.
Mm-hmm.
I
threw that. I don't know if we want to keep going on that topic. Tommy, go ahead. Oh, London.
Bill.
Didn't we have that 2 weeks ago?
I agree with you, Bill. What happened?
I think London's in
I
a
think
classroom. He has to wave
he's
his
got
arms.
he's got his motion detector. He's over there doing jumping jacks.
I was too.
Exercise.
I was like,
There you go.
Yeah. That's funny.
I see it.
You know what? I'm gonna let London answer part of that, but I'm gonna start the answer off. And Bill, you're right. We need to get representation in all levels of law enforcement, and that would change things. However, London, how likely is that to happen?
You know, that's the sad part. You're not going to see representation within organizations such as law enforcement. You're just not going to see it. They give us our few and try to hide them in the back, or they bring us out when bad stuff happens. We're like, hey, these are your folks. You can talk to them.
The token, right?
Yeah, handle that for me. But it's not. They don't put you in. They don't tend to promote you into too many positions of power, because they know with that power we're going to change the culture. And I love what you were saying, Bill. Like it's not a bad apple. It's actually a bad tree. When you think about it, it's a bad tree that was rooted in racism, and it needs to be dug up. And a new tree needs to be planted that is all about truly community and true service to the community. Because we know policing is not going to go anywhere, but how do we fix the problems that we deal with now? And it is true. We need representation, because I don't know how many times I've had white officers trying to teach me how to patrol in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. I was like, how you telling me how to do this? I grew up with these folks. Like, so, how do you train me, and how do you train somebody that, can go to them and talk to them, and they respect me because they know where I'm from. So it's almost that it is, in a sense, like when I look at it, sometimes, especially not sometimes, but in law enforcement, there is that, it's still that white supremacy, almost that white savior complex, that I've come to your communities to save you from yourself, when we don't need that. Like, we're not asking you to come in as Superman and come save us. We want equity. We want to be treated fair. We want to be treated equal. And like you were saying, systemic racism is across the board. It's not just one facet in law enforcement. It's with education, healthcare, you name it, so to be able to work on this, this issue is huge in itself, because now you have a community of people who are not scared to live. And just like in the book, it shook me, because it was like, why is it, that we should be fearful when we see those lights come behind us, and that speaks volume to the system and how people of color are treated.
Right. Is there
and I'll follow up on that, Bill.
Go ahead.
Bill, I'll follow up on that and tell you, quantifiably, the representation that you speak of, I believe, is the resolution, but it's not going to happen. And I'll use me as an example. I'll use me as a perfect example. In the state of California, when I first became a police chief in 1994, there were 20 African-American police chiefs out of 144 municipal cities in California. By 2002, that number had dropped to 12 African-American police chiefs. And in 2002, there were 10 female police chiefs, and there were 14 Hispanic police chiefs. Fast forward to 2013, there were only 9 African Americans, but there was 20 female police chiefs, and there was down to 16 Hispanics. As you go up the ladder, and every police organization I know of, universities are probably the best police departments for diversity out of the entire policing system. They just are, and I got to give it to them. But generally, the higher you go, Bill, from officer to sergeant to lieutenant to captain to deputy chief or commander, the fewer people of color are you going to have anywhere, especially in California.
Wow.
Tell me an industry where that's not true.
Good one.
Sports.
That's not true.
Basketball.
Tell me
Football.
how many black NFL owners do you know?
I said sports, but I was talking about basketball more than. And now you do have black NFL owners now. You do have black coaches. The other thing you have is black quarterbacks now. You never had that.
That's true. That's true.
I don't know, London, you agree?
Yeah. I still don't think there's enough, but they are, making that move. But yeah, I mean, I'm still like, okay, we can do better. But what Tommy said regarding the command staff level, the chiefs, yeah, I mean, that's spot on. Like I tell you, when I saw and not to discredit the chief of Santa Monica who resigned, female chief who resigned, but when they brought Jackie Seabrooks back for the few months that she's been there, I was like, yes, because she did a great job, and it was legit representation. To see this amazing, strong, like super intelligent African-American female chief, just like, it's like, no, you called me to come fix the problem. And I thought that was awesome.
She is one of the most articulate.
Yes.
And a close friend of mine. I don't know if London, you knew that or not, but Jackie's a close friend. I'm honored and privileged because she calls me and asks me about stuff, and I call her because I've never met anybody as articulate and sharp as this female black police chief in Santa Monica. Yeah. She just absolutely amazing.
Okay, so let me ask the two of you a question. If you say that it's the representation issue is unlikely to be solved, are we going to see real change short of that happening? And if so, what's the mechanism what's the mechanism for that change, that real change to happen in that culture? How are we going to plant a new tree without representation?
Just from thinking about that, I think like the thing that I see is one of the biggest issues is education. No one really knows about policing. Like, you hear about Robert Peel, and that's it. Like, you can ask, I can go up to and ask an officer to this day, and they have no clue about night watchmen, slave patrol, what happened in the North, what was going on in the South. They have no clue. They can tell you Robert Peel because that's what people want them to know, because they want to sweep the ugly side of policing under the rug. If people knew the history, I think they would become more, it's almost like they become more compassionate and empathetic. Those that have hearts, those that are in it for the wrong reason, because you start to form a new culture, because now you know the true history of policing. You start to form this new culture, and people that don't want to be a part of that will just weed themselves out. It's just like the academy. If you're not fit for this, once they start tightening the reins, then it's like, okay, I need to go. This isn't for me. So when you establish a culture in law enforcement based off of the true principles that you establish, and not this slave patrol mentality that's actually, just continued from, from its inception. When you start that and you start bringing the right people in these positions of power, and those people, those people of color that are in those positions start to elevate one another, then I think you'll see an honest change in the culture. But first you have to know where you come from before you can actually move forward and change the trajectory of something. And the majority of these officers, just from the ones that I've had encounters with since being back on patrol, have no clue of police culture's real inception. They have no clue.
And the other thing is, Bill, they're very defensive. If you start to talk about slave patrols, fugitive slave, now, if you start to talk about it, they're going to just clam up. They're going to take the hard line, and that's the way it's going to be. And London just gave a great explanation as to why transformational policing is so important, the course that I teach. Because what I do is I go all the way back to the Civil War, and I draw a nexus, an alignment with what happened to this very thing that Letty has on screen, through Jim Crow, through NAACP, through the 60s riots, through Rodney King, to present day. And I show why it's like that. I mean, London told you. And I can tell you right now, that timeline is in my course for a reason. And when I put that timeline in the course, you wouldn't believe the number of people that talk about it. But it's like I told Rich a while back, and London, you're going to appreciate this. I can't get the people who need to be in the class. I can't get the white cops in the class. Tell me I'm wrong, right. London. Tell me I'm wrong.
Not wrong at all. Not wrong at all. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because it rips away at the identity of who they are. Once you realize what you are a part of, if you're being real with yourself, it's going to rock your world. When I came back out to patrol, even though I knew like history and I knew all of that, when I came back out to patrol in July and I started driving around, my first couple of weeks, I didn't pull over anyone. And the reality of it was like I had started looking at exactly what they taught me to look at the shave head Hispanic men that are driving certain cars, look at the group of brothers that are all piled in one car. Like I started to look at that, but I let every white person pass me. And I'm like, them jokers could have had like 8 heads in a duffel bag. And I never would have known because my mind said that they are right. They are like, there's nothing wrong with them. And I remember I pulled over and I just stopped and I called one of my friends who's a professor here. And I told her, I said, I'm part of the problem. I said, I just realized I'm part of the problem. I bought into a system that force fed me what I was supposed to believe, what they wanted me to believe. And I started to look at people of color as the issue when it's not them, it's crime is the issue. It's not the people. And after that, I was just like, it totally changed my mentality. It basically confirmed everything that I believed in the first place. But now I would sit there and I was like, oh, okay, I'm right. I'm not going crazy. I'm like, I'm actually right with this. So I begin to pick at those things that I saw once I started getting trainees in the car with me. I began to see those biases, those small things that they were doing and why they were doing it. And I was like, stop. And explain to them why. And it would go into this history lesson. It honestly would. But it works. It works.
Tommy, is that something that is part of the academy, or are we talking about there has to be that training and then after they become officers is when then they're introduced to these new concepts? Because it seems like that's part of the problem, right? They become officers first.
Yeah, it starts in the academy. It starts in the academy. Everything he said, I remember when I was in the academy, you know, it was me and one other black guy out of 60 people, and we're in the academy, and they said, okay, here's what you do. For 6 months, they told me what the objective symptoms were, what the observations were, and so they would want me to do that. And when we did what's called scenario training in the academy, if you pulled over somebody who wasn't in a hoopty, a low riding Chevy, you pulled somebody over in a BMW or a Mercedes, you were going to have a problem with your TAC officer and your training officer. So absolutely. And I will tell you a little caveat that makes this conversation so great to me personally. London is a training officer. The most important person in American policing is the training officer, period, end of story. Not me as chief, nobody else, because he influences how those areas we're talking about can be dispelled, and he can mold and fashion the direction.
It's crucial. It's so crucial. We talk often about how we're training teachers, sort of like those mindsets and how we say, and it's like diversity. There's one class on multiculturalism, and then you're just expected to be able to do that job with any sort of equitable mindset. But that's so dangerous if you're doing that.
It's worse than that. Let me give you some breakdowns that are not very nice to hear. Our academies are about 900 hours over 5 to 6 months. Rich, I told you about this a couple years ago. 900 hours. We have anywhere from 80 to 200 in shooting, 80 to 200 in crime scene, 80 to 200 and everything else, driving, okay? We have 16 hours of cultural diversity out of 900 hours. Now they just kicked it up to 3 learning dimensions of 21 hours. Think about that. 900 hours of training, 21 hours toward cultural diversity training. And they wonder why we have this issue nationwide.
What happens in that cultural diversity training in those 21
We're not
hours?
wondering.
London,
tell them who teaches those classes.
You know, it's to be honest, it's a joke. It's a joke. First off, nobody wants to be there, and everybody makes it seem like it's a chore. And the instructor, typically the instructor will walk in there and says, well, I know you guys all don't want to be here, but hey, you know, we have to do this. So it kills the whole learning vibe already. And so that's dead. That's dead in the water. And then what ends up happening is that the content it glances over true historical facts. Like they'll throw up that famous picture of the police officer holding the dog, and then the water hose pictures that show them like, hey, here's the civil rights movement. Okay, and let's move this out of the way. And they push past it. They do, and it's a joke. And if anybody goes up there, and I had a friend that actually who worked at Berkeley, and she actually went up and she said, can you like talk about slave patrol and all of that? And they were like, oh, that stuff didn't happen. That's all fabricated, blah, blah, blah.
Oh man.
And she was like, yeah, this class is crap.
Yeah.
So, that's what you're dealing with. If I don't have to stand and be held accountable for the past, then then I don't have to change it, because it wasn't me. It never happened. And that's the attitude. That's the attitude. That didn't happen. Or they say, well, it's better now. No, it's not better. That's why we're having these conversations. It hasn't changed. It's turned into something different, but it hasn't changed.
What if there was
so many times,
federal, state, whatever, that made it law that certain things had to be talked about in police training in a specific number of hours? Does forced you know what I'm saying? Does forced policy and law start to make a change? So if we as a group got together and wrote a bill that we could start running through our state assembly to say, this is what we want, you know, and not just us, but this is what people want. They want officers trained in this kind of sensitivity, and you got to make this happen. Now, I know Tommy's the expert on it, and the reason I say it is I was watching a news broadcast, and they were talking about, we're going to write a bill on changes in the country and things that need to be written. But I just, pushing that effort and writing a bill and giving, handing it over as a pre-written document to politicians. Mm-hmm. Pre-written documents go a long ways for politicians. But I'm baffled at how this change would ever come about, and in all my whiteness, I've witnessed just little tidbits, and with George Floyd, I sat and watched a lot of it, and getting away from the horrific video, there was a short video as part of the trial in which Chauvin was sitting in his car, and a community member was yelling at him saying, "What, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to do that." And his comment was, "Did you see how big that guy was?" He said, "I was afraid." He was afraid. And he was so that was his comment, is he was afraid. And so he felt totally justified in kneeling on the man's neck and killing him. And so
we have heard that same story, Rich, I'll just go back as many years as I can remember. I've heard that same story for 40 years from Rodney King forward. And I can go through all the names. It's just that there's an inherent fear of a male black that's above 6'2". Right. And just the way it is. And to answer your question on legislation, I've been up in Sacramento, and I know you know this, but it's DOA. It's dead on arrival. If you're going to say, let's have more mandated training that deals with culture and race, no, we need to do other essential learning domains. Race isn't one of them.
A year ago when George Floyd died, there was a hot iron, and we talked about this when we were doing Juneteenth and some of the plans, that the iron is hot. We have to make changes, and you can feel that's cooling down now. And the uprising that took place in Black Lives Matter, and you can feel that, you miss those opportunities. That would have been the perfect time to write a bill such as this. But you're right. But you do have to try, right? Isn't there a...
So
the way it
just
works
for a second, I'm gonna pull us back to the book, because on page 93, which is where I'm taking this particular quote from here, the belief that Black people and people of color are more dangerous, unpredictable, and violent is not something I believe most police officers and other Americans even know they believe. And so if there are people walking into an academy to do this training, and then this fear, this belief that's ingrained in their brain because of what they've seen in movies, on TV, on the news, it's reinforced, right? In the training, it's reinforced. But then she also says at the end of this section is that the fear itself is racist. So when Richard, when you talk about, if a police officer can always say, "I was afraid," we're not even able to have the conversation about how racist it is that you're able to say that, and that everyone just says, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," right? The fear itself, the way we react to things, is part of the systemic problem.
Well, we could start by not letting people off the hook when they say that they felt afraid. We could hold them accountable for proving that there was an actual threat. One of the arguments that I've heard on the George Floyd situation is, the guy's face down, hands cuffed behind his back. At that point, just stand up and walk away, because most people couldn't even get out of that position by themselves. So there's no threat at that point. There's no, even if you felt afraid of the big guy, you know, you got him cuffed. He's face down. Just if you feel scared, you can take a few steps back and you'll be just fine. But you know, when when we stop maybe allowing that argument to be effective, maybe people will stop using it.
I don't think so, Bill. Let me tell you a quick story, and it's gonna take this here and let
Debbie
you
Downer.
is police brutality really about race? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So
And
we're answering that question.
I remember
Yes.
hearing, and I'm sorry, what?
I'm just saying the answer
London,
is yes to all of the questions.
Yeah, London, tell me if this is still true. I hope to God that you tell me it's not. I really, in my heart of hearts, hope it's not true. So, Bill, I remember going out in the patrol car, working patrol in an agency, a rather large agency, and I was, I'd been a cop 5 years. And so I'm out in patrol one day and I hear over the radio from one of my colleagues out there. He says, I'll be making a Charlie stop at this location. And I pulled over, and I'm a pretty good cop. I looked in the radio code book, Charlie stop, Charlie stop. Charlie stop's not in here. So I got in the air and says, I'll be en route to back. The sergeant got on the air and says, no, negative, you don't respond. There are units closer. No, there wasn't. I find out later that was a made-up radio code for whenever an officer pulled over a black driver. If he pulled over a black, he's not going to say black over the air. He's not going to say they said a Charlie stop.
Wow.
London, tell me that doesn't still happen.
I haven't heard it. Yeah, but I heard of those stories, and that's terrible, because it is that fear. Why do you need to broadcast it as that if there wasn't this perceived fear of the group of people of blacks? Like, there would be no reason. So you're getting everybody to this stop, other than other black officers, because you want to do whatever it is that you want to do to this black driver, and that's terrible, because it is that perceived fear, that whole birth of a nation fear, how we're looked at as animals and savages and things like that, and that stuff is still carrying on. I mean, to this day, whether they are calling us that outright in a radio call, calling us, a Charlie stop in a radio call, or is it just when you pull over an African American, you end up with 4 or 5 additional officers on that traffic stop? Why is that? Why is that? Do you think that we're going to become, green and rip the car open and come after you? You were in fear for your safety. Well, here's my thing. If you were in that much fear, you probably shouldn't be doing this job.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I've had conversations very similar to that. It's, I won't pick on any particular police department, but we've had conversations where we're talking about being in shape. You're ready to go, and not having to shoot people, and not, all the different things that come with that. And that fear would go away if you were confident in your abilities to subdue, but not kill, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So what was the answer? The answer was education, because yes, it's always about race. We have a few minutes left. There's a piece of art that I came across on LinkedIn, and then I tracked down the artist on Facebook, and I wanted to show. I reacted strongly to it, and I kind of want to get feedback, and this kind of answers the question also in a pretty dramatic way. I'm going to try to get it on the full screen, so forgive me if it doesn't work. The artist his name is Mr. Show Me, and I'll put his information on the screen here in a second. And track this down. Can you guys see that? To me, this picture answers the question, because it didn't go down like this. But there's an argument, I guess, on both sides. I don't know if anyone wants to make a comment.
You know, yeah, just looking at this, like, and what caught my attention is not the roles are reversed, but the white officers coming with their guns drawn, it looking like they're coming after Floyd to get him.
Right.
Still.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's the part that messed me up, because I'm like, yeah. Oh, it changes now. You know, it totally changes.
I'm almost speechless for anybody to have the audacity to do this.
Do you mean, are you reacting to the artwork? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's hard to look at this for me. It really is.
Yeah. The post I saw on LinkedIn was a woman, and it didn't say who the artist was, and it was so jarring when I saw it. I thought, okay, I got to track this down. And you know, her response was she was really upset. You could tell, you know, the language she was using. Black woman, just like, I'm pissed off, and I want you to look at this, and I want you to react to it. But then I go to the artist page, and it's more like, wow. Like, so people are reacting to the artist in a different way, maybe because they're fans of his and they've seen his other work. And in that, for him, it was more, those reactions were more like, this is incredible. I'm crying. I'm affected. I'm speechless. Like, they're commenting on the artist page in a different way than people on LinkedIn were responding. But it was, I mean, it upset me. So I thought that it was something that I wanted to share, because it was like a visceral reaction to it. So I wanted to get your take.
It's pure disrespect.
One thing I did notice the guns drawn too.
Wow.
Was that Tom?
Tommy, what did you say?
It's just pure disrespect. To what happened to him, to even remotely think about that. And you know, Bill, I liken that to reading certain Facebook comments that I'm no longer going to watch the Major League Baseball. I'm not going to watch the NFL anymore. I'm not going to watch Major League anything anymore because of the black protests against social justice. They said, I'm done with pro sports. That is what I liken that to. I don't know, Bill, if you know what I'm talking about when I say that.
You feel it's disrespectful to George Floyd, or to the police, or to both?
To both, because that's not what happened. And to try to make it fit into the world that's acceptable to you, what that cartoon says is, hey, black people, if it were the other way around, would you still oppose excessive force? That's what that picture says.
Oh, that's interesting.
I didn't read it that way. I mean, I totally see what you're saying. I sort of read
as a cop, I read it that way. That's all.
Can you, Letty, what's the racial background of the artist? Just out of curiosity.
There's no photo. His name is, well, I don't think it's his real name now that I'm going to say it out loud. Ortega.
Yeah, I wrote
or something
it down
like that.
and I thought, wait, that's a real name.
He goes by Mr. Show Me. That's his name. If you can find him on
Yeah,
Facebook, he's got a bunch.
He's not going to reveal, Bill. He's not going to reveal it.
Well, to me,
There's
that sort of maybe shapes what his message is trying to achieve. I don't know. I mean, it obviously it's a provocative message either way.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the message isn't to. What if the message is to white people to say, "Hey, are you gonna still defend this cop's actions if he's black?"
No,
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it. It's interesting.
That's true. I can tell you just, Bill, from my viewpoint as a cop, that
Sure.
they switched the roles on purpose to see
Mm-hmm.
if it would upset people as much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Well, the fact that it shows in the background the other officers running toward him with their guns drawn, when that wasn't part of the scene originally anyway, sort of suggested. I kind of read that as like, hey, if this was reversed, you'd have other cops taking him down. You wouldn't. They wouldn't have been just. They wouldn't have just been sitting there watching it happen. So it's an interesting. I think I'm a big fan of art because I feel like it makes us think about things and makes us talk about things maybe in a way that we hadn't thought about them before. So maybe it, and art. Shoot. Art is often disrespectful, right? I mean, some of the best art in the whole history of art is disrespectful on purpose to be provocative. I totally hear what you're saying, Tommy, and I absolutely always respect your opinion and your viewpoint on things. But it is interesting. I mean, look at us; it got us talking about it, right? So maybe it was a win.
A lot of his work is based in activism. There are a lot of Breonna Taylor art pieces. There's a few I Can't Breathe, like protest kind of like mural type thing. So he's done a lot. And that one that I showed you is called What If. It's just called What If. I do like the different perspectives though, because I really did. London, the first thing I noticed was that you could see the other police officers running in with their guns drawn.
Yeah.
That was like, oh, there would still be a dead person, but probably two dead people. And one of them would be the police officer.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I got from it. I was like, hey, black folks, you ain't doing this to us because we'll take you out. And that's exactly how I looked at it. These two white officers running, and here's the thing, they wasn't even in the same uniform. They're running after him to take him out from doing that.
Yeah.
In tactical gear.
Yeah, in
tactical gear. They were in SWAT gear.
SWAT gear. So you need to call out the big guns for us black people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
So Bill, I'm sorry join my class so you can learn about this stuff.
I'm sorry if I scarred anyone with that. I didn't mean to upset.
Bill, did you hear me?
He's muted.
You're
muted, Bill.
I think I'm going to sign up for your class.
You know what? I'll sign up for your class, but I have to warn you. You're probably the first cop I ever met that didn't hate the way I looked, apparently, because every time I've ever been pulled over, they're just immediately angry at me. I just have that kind of face or something.
Oh my God.
Maybe you're secretly angry at me too. I don't know for sure. But on that picture, I can't remember where the cops that were running toward him in the tactical gear, were they wearing gloves, or could you see whether they were white or not in that picture?
Arms. You can see their arms.
Are they white? I can't remember.
Yes, they are.
I'm not good with details. Okay,
but you're right.
White.
It's a different uniform. It's like SWAT, the SWAT team coming out, but you can see they're wearing short sleeves.
See the combat boots?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like this is a challenge to white people to say, hey, look, how would you feel about this scenario? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what art does, right? Okay. We're at the
Rich,
top
you
of
heard
the
it
hour.
here. Bill's gonna sign up for my class. Letty, will you take
We're all
my
gonna
class
sign
too?
We're all
Do
going
I
to
get
sign
a
up for
pay
your
raise
class.
if I finish your class? Do I get a little pay bump at BC? Is that how it works?
We'll give you
That's gonna
overtime.
be up to Rich on that one.
Overtime.
Overtime. Administrators don't get overtime. That's a trick. Nice try, Rich. Can't fool me, buddy.
Flex training hours. That's what it is.
I don't get those either.
Part of your contract. Duties as assigned.
I'll do it for an extra vacation day that I can't take every year. That's cool.
Yeah, let's why don't we set up a community education class, and then we can start educating people that way.
We do have it. We'll talk about maybe getting it out to the community, and then Bill and I will lead the way. Nothing really stopping me from taking Tommy's class, and now I'm interested.
Bill, last week
6 months.
I announced last week that when we finish this book that we're going to start the show that I'm going to create, that's going to be called Two White Guys Talking About Things They Shouldn't Be Talking About, and that could be the first thing that we do. Just take that class.
We better get some
Trademark.
royalties off of this thing.
Yeah.
Copyrighted. Everybody, don't steal my.
You know
what? I would like to say that nobody wants to watch that show, but sadly, I feel like people would.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm definitely going to watch the show.
One really good thing. What
Branding
I really like, London, and for you to hear is that the two gentlemen you see on the screen came to a meeting during Juneteenth and said in open forum to people, we need to talk about things that make us as white people uncomfortable. They had the nerve to say that in front of people, and I have never forgotten that.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's why we're gonna have a show. I'm telling you.
Hey, I'm there. I'm glued.
You're here. You're a part of it.
You're already in.
You're in on the ground floor, London.
Archived footage. You're in.
Hey, London, would you tell them, for the good of the cause, particularly the gentleman named Rich McCrow, that you were in the process of trying to get TPM at your department, please?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, we need it. We definitely need it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, we gotta change something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for this conversation, you guys. I'm gonna cut it off because I don't want to keep anybody. It's after 8, and I know London is still sitting in his classroom. Lights are gonna go out again.
All right, everybody.
He's got to drive. I want to put up,
Me, London.
next week
Thanks,
we're gonna
y'all.
be
Great talking to y'all.
Next week we're going to be
Give me a
talking
call,
about
London.
affirmative.
Will do.
Give me a call.
Thank you. Join us next week. We'll talk about affirmative action. London, we'll have you back for another conversation. And then we'll solve all the world's problems. All right. Thanks, everybody.
We can do it. Let's do it.